Calaroga Shark Media.
On October 28th, 312 CE, two armies faced each other at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome. The outcome would determine not just who would rule the Roman Empire, but would fundamentally transform the papacy from a persecuted underground institution into an imperial partner. According to later accounts, Constantine, before the battle, saw a vision in the sky. A cross with the words, "In this sign, conquer." His victory the following day began Christianity's transition from outlawed sect to state religion. For Pope Miltiades, who had known only a life of secrecy and persecution, this sudden imperial favour presented unprecedented opportunities and challenges. Within months, he would receive imperial property for the church's use and preside over a council in the emperor's palace. The papacy, for nearly 3 centuries, a marginal institution leading a minority faith, abruptly found itself with access to power, wealth, and influence beyond its predecessors' imagination. Today, we examine the papacy's initial transformation from the catacombs to Constantine's court. We explore how the first post-persecution popes navigated their new relationship with imperial power and how church structures evolved from hidden house churches to grand public basilicas. This is the story of the papal revolution that fundamentally redefined the office for all subsequent history. This is White Smoke, Episode 20, The Imperial Transition. Pope Miltiades straddled Christianity's underground and imperial periods. Elected shortly after Emperor Galerius issued an edict grudgingly tolerating Christianity, Miltiades experienced both persecution's final phase and Constantine's unexpected patronage. Constantine's victory over rival Maxentius in 312 CE fundamentally altered the political landscape. The new emperor quickly demonstrated favour toward Christianity, returning confiscated properties and granting new privileges. In 313, Constantine and his eastern colleague Licinius issued the famous Edict of Milan, establishing full legal tolerance for Christianity throughout the empire. For Miltiades, this sudden shift from persecution to imperial favour required delicate navigation. While welcoming legal protection and returned properties, he needed to maintain the church's internal integrity and independence. The Roman Church had developed its theology, structures and leadership without state support, indeed under state opposition. Integrating imperial favour without compromising essential identity posed significant challenges. Miltiades represents a crucial transitional figure, explains Dr. H.A. Drake, professor of Roman history at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Having experienced persecution himself, he suddenly needed to develop protocols for interacting with an emperor who presented himself as Christianity's protector. There was no precedent for this relationship. This new relationship became visible when Constantine asked Miltiades to convene a council at the Lateran Palace in 313 CE to address a schism among North African Christians, the Donatist controversy. This meeting marked the first time a pope presided over a council in an imperial setting, establishing a pattern that would fundamentally reshape ecclesiastical governance. When Silvester succeeded Miltiades, the partnership between papacy and empire deepened further. Constantine granted the Lateran Palace itself to the church as a papal residence and funded construction of major basilicas in Rome, including St. Peter's on the Vatican Hill and St. John Lateran. These massive structures physically embodied Christianity's new public status and imperial connection. Paradoxically, Silvester himself remains a somewhat shadowy historical figure despite presiding over this revolutionary period. He did not attend the pivotal Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, instead sending representatives. This absence from history's most famous church council contrasts sharply with later legendary accounts that vastly exaggerated his relationship with Constantine. The historical Silvester was overshadowed by Constantine during his lifetime and then by legendary embellishment after his death, notes Dr. Julia Hillner, Professor of Medieval History at the University of Sheffield. The famous Donation of Constantine, a medieval forgery claiming Constantine granted the Pope authority over the Western Empire, projected back onto Silvester a political power he never actually possessed. The actual relationship was more complex. Constantine valued Christianity primarily as a unifying force for his empire and expected bishops, including the Pope, to promote this unity. When doctrinal disputes threatened this unity, Constantine intervened directly, sometimes bypassing or overruling episcopal authority. The emperor, not the Pope, convened the Council of Nicaea and heavily influenced its proceedings. For Silvester and his immediate successors, the challenge was maintaining ecclesiastical independence while benefiting from imperial patronage. The papacy gained unprecedented resources and legal protection, but risked becoming subordinate to imperial priorities rather than maintaining its distinctive spiritual mission. The Constantinian revolution transformed not just the papacy's political situation, but its physical environment. Archaeological evidence reveals a dramatic shift from the pre-Constantinian period, when Christians gathered primarily in adapted domestic spaces, to the post-313 construction of monumental basilicas specifically designed for Christian worship. Recent excavations beneath churches like San Clemente and Santi Giovanni e Paolo in Rome reveal this architectural transition. Lower levels show typical house church adaptations, residential spaces modified with wall removals to create larger gathering areas. Decorative elements adding Christian symbols to otherwise typical Roman houses. Upper levels demonstrate the completely new basilica form that emerged under Constantine. Massive public buildings with standardized layouts optimized for liturgical functions. This architectural revolution represents more than just increased resources, explains Dr. Nicola Denzi-Lewis, Professor of Religious Studies at Claremont Graduate University. It embodies a fundamental reconception of Christian worship itself, from intimate gatherings in domestic settings to grand public ceremonies in monumental spaces. This transition profoundly altered how ordinary Christians experienced their faith and how the clergy, especially bishops, performed their roles. The new papal basilicas, St. Peter's, St. John Lateran, St. Paul outside the walls, and Santa Maria Maggiore, though the latter was built slightly later, established a monumental sacred geography for Christian Rome that effectively displaced the traditional pagan sacred sites. The Pope, previously leading a marginal religious community from borrowed or adapted spaces, now presided over the empire's most magnificent religious buildings. This material revolution extended beyond architecture to liturgical objects, vestments, and ceremonial practices. Pre-Constantinian Christian worship employed relatively simple implements, often repurposed domestic items. Post-Constantinian churches featured elaborate gold and silver liturgical vessels, richly embroidered vestments, and ceremonial elements adapted from imperial court rituals. Papal tombs similarly reflect this transition. Early popes were buried in relatively simple graves in community cemeteries, later developed into catacombs. Constantine's construction of St. Peter's Basilica over the Apostles' traditional burial site established a new pattern of monumental commemorative architecture that subsequent popes would adopt for themselves. The material transition from catacombs to basilicas created a new kind of papal presence, notes Dakota Kate Cooper. Previously, the Pope's authority was primarily personal and moral. Now it became increasingly ceremonial and institutional, embodied in grand structures and elaborate rituals that paralleled imperial practices. For ordinary Christians, this transition created both opportunities and challenges. The new public basilicas enabled larger gatherings and more elaborate liturgies, but potentially reduced the intimate community experience of house churches. Christianity became more visible and accessible, but also more formally structured and hierarchical. Constantine's favor fundamentally altered Christianity's social position, transforming it from a marginalized, occasionally persecuted minority into an increasingly privileged religion. This transition profoundly affected the papacy's composition, relationship to society, and internal understanding. Pre-Constantinian popes typically came from relatively modest social backgrounds, often with connections to trade or commerce rather than the senatorial aristocracy. The underground church, while including some wealthy members, primarily drew from middle and lower social strata. Leadership selection emphasized spiritual qualities and community respect rather than social status or political connections. Post-Constantinian popes increasingly came from more elite backgrounds as Christianity spread among the upper classes and church positions became more socially prestigious. By the late 4th century, many clergy came from senatorial families, bringing aristocratic values and administrative experience, but potentially reducing the social diversity of church leadership. This social transformation created both opportunities and tensions, explains Dr. Kate Blair Dixon, historian at the University of Pennsylvania. The church gained educated leadership familiar with imperial administration, but risked adopting the very status hierarchies that early Christianity had often challenged. Bishops, including popes, increasingly resembled secular officials in their lifestyle, education, and social connections. This social shift manifested in changing language about church leadership. Pre-Constantinian texts typically described bishops, including the Pope, as shepherds, servants, or elders, emphasizing spiritual care and community guidance. Post-Constantinian language increasingly employed terms like ruler, rector, and governor, gubernator, drawing parallels between ecclesiastical and secular authority. For the papacy specifically, this transition enabled new forms of cultural production and influence. Pope Damasus sponsored Jerome's creation of the Latin Vulgate Bible translation, commissioned elaborate inscriptions for martyrs' tombs, and patronized church construction and decoration. These activities paralleled traditional aristocratic patronage while directing it toward distinctively Christian purposes. Damasus exemplifies the new papal engagement with elite cultural forms, notes Dr. Dennis Trout, professor of classical studies at the University of Missouri. His elegant Latin inscriptions for martyrs' shrines created a distinctively Christian cultural program using classical literary techniques. He simultaneously claimed Christian distinctiveness and demonstrated the faith's capacity to appropriate and transform classical culture. This cultural engagement extended to the development of more elaborate liturgical practices and ceremonial elements that paralleled imperial court rituals. Processions, specialized vestments, formal protocols for approaching the Pope, and designated seating hierarchies all reflected secular administrative practices adapted for ecclesiastical contexts. These changes generated internal tensions, with some Christians concerned that the Church was losing its countercultural witness through accommodation to imperial society. Monastic movements partly emerged as reactions against this perceived compromise, with desert monks and later urban monastics seeking to maintain Christianity's prophetic edge amidst its newfound privilege. For the papacy, navigating these tensions required balancing institutional growth with spiritual authenticity, imperial partnership with prophetic independence, and cultural engagement with distinctive Christian witness. Different popes struck this balance differently, creating ongoing internal debates about the proper relationship between church and society that continue to resonate in contemporary discussions.
What if everything you've been taught about happiness is wrong? We chase careers, approval, more stuff, hoping it'll finally make us feel fulfilled, but it never sticks. What if happiness isn't out there, but already inside you, just waiting to be unlocked? Discover the book, The Happiness Experiment. Every person has a unique happiness type, and when you understand yours, everything shifts. You'll stop chasing and start creating joy on your own terms. Discover your happiness type with a free happiness type assessment. Go to myhappinesstype.com. That's myhappinesstype.com. It takes just a minute and it might change your life. Then grab your copy of The Happiness Experiment at Books A Million. This isn't just a book, it's a practical framework, a journey inward. It's a tool to help you reconnect with the happiness that's been waiting inside you all along. Pick up The Happiness Experiment and start your happiness experiment today.
The papacy that emerged in the immediate post-Constantine period demonstrated remarkable institutional adaptability. Figures like Miltiades and Silvester successfully navigated the transition from persecution to privilege without abandoning essential Christian principles or traditions. They accepted imperial benefits while maintaining sufficient independence to prevent the Church from becoming merely a department of state. Their legacy established patterns that would define papal development for centuries to come. They created precedents for church-state cooperation that would influence medieval political theology. They established architectural and ceremonial models that would shape Catholic worship into modern times. They began the process of integrating Christian theology with Roman administrative structures that would eventually produce the sophisticated canonical system of the medieval Church. Yet their papacies also revealed tensions and vulnerabilities that would persist throughout subsequent history. The dependence on imperial favor made the Church potentially subject to political manipulation. The adoption of elite cultural forms risked alienation from ordinary believers. The accumulation of property and prestige created temptations toward worldliness that contradicted Christian teachings about simplicity and service. These first imperial popes thus established not just a new institutional reality, but a series of fundamental questions about the Church's proper relationship to power, culture, and society that subsequent popes would continue to navigate. Their revolutionary transformation of the papacy from marginal to central, from persecuted to privileged, created both opportunities and challenges that continue to shape the institution to the present day. In our next episode, we'll examine how the theological controversies of the 4th century, particularly the Arian crisis, further shaped papal authority, and how figures like Pope Damasus I consolidated and expanded the papal revolution begun under Constantine. White Smoke is a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration.
From the creators of Palace Intrigue, a new chapter in royal history begins. William and Kate's wedding captures the world's attention, but royal life isn't as perfect as it seems. Tensions rise as Harry meets Meghan, sparking a divide that will shake the monarchy to its core. From explosive interviews to family scandals, the royal family faces its most public challenges ever. As King Charles takes the throne, the future of the monarchy hangs in the balance. Family secrets, royal rifts, and the future of the crown. Crown and Controversy, wherever you get your podcasts.
There's always something brewing behind palace walls, whether it's Prince Harry and Meghan Markle making headlines from afar, or Prince William and Princess Catherine quietly preparing for the future throne. I'm Mark Francis, and on Palace Intrigue, we cover every twist, turn, whisper, and wink. From royal drama to daily gossip, follow Palace Intrigue wherever you get your podcasts.
You know the silhouette, the squint, the voice that cuts like a blade. Clint Eastwood isn't just a movie star. He's a myth, a mayor, a cultural fault line, and maybe the last great American icon. Eastwood Reloaded tells his story one chapter at a time. The hits, the flops, the chaos between the scenes. Because legends aren't born, they're built. Eastwood Reloaded. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.